I never imagined that a single moment could shift the foundation of a friendship I had trusted for years. Morgan and I had been close for as long as I could remember, two inseparable halves of a whole. We met in college, quickly bonding over our shared humor and late-night conversations about life. Morgan, effortlessly charming and undeniably straight, never once saw me as anything beyond a friend. And I had accepted that. Or at least, I thought I had. That night, I had just finished showering, letting the steam from the bathroom wrap around me like a fragile cocoon. The room was dimly lit, my towel draped lazily over the chair as I rummaged through my drawers, searching for something comfortable to wear. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, nothing more. Then, the door swung open. Morgan stood there, frozen, his expression caught somewhere between surprise and something unreadable. For a split second, neither of us moved. The air between us turned heavy, thick with an unspoken tension that hadn't existed a moment before. "Shit, sorry," Morgan blurted out, scrambling to back away. I grabbed the nearest piece of clothing, my pulse pounding in my ears. "You ever heard of knocking?" I snapped, more out of shock than actual anger. His hand lingered on the doorknob, hesitation flickering across his face before he finally stepped out and shut the door behind him. I stood there, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't the fact that he had seen me naked. Accidents happen. It was the way he looked at me, the way his eyes lingered just a second too long before he turned away. For the rest of the night, I tried to push the thought aside. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overanalyzing an awkward situation. But deep down, something felt different. That moment, brief as it was, had created a fracture in the unshakable certainty of our friendship. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to ignore it or see how deep the crack would go. The morning after, everything should have gone back to normal. But it didn't. Morgan and I had always been easy with each other, joking, teasing, never a moment of discomfort between us. But now something had shifted. The memory of last night lingered like an echo neither of us could silence. At breakfast, he barely met my eyes. His usual confidence, the effortless way he carried himself, was replaced by something almost cautious. I caught him glancing at me more than once, only for him to look away the second our eyes met. "You're quiet today," I said, testing the waters. He shrugged, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "Just tired." A weak excuse. I could have pressed, but I didn't. Because truthfully, I was just as unsettled. That single moment of exposure, of vulnerability, had unraveled something in me. I had convinced myself for years that my feelings for Morgan were purely platonic, that I had long since buried any fleeting attraction beneath the weight of our friendship. But now, every stolen glance, every hesitation, every unspoken word between us felt charged in a way I couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, the tension only grew. Our usual easy banter turned careful, our conversations filled with pauses that hadn't been there before. Morgan started acting differently, not distant exactly, but measured. It was in the way he stood just a little farther away, in the way his laughter didn't come as easily, in the way he hesitated before touching my shoulder like he always used to. Then came the night that changed everything. We were watching a movie, something we'd done 100 times before. The room was dim, the flickering screen casting shifting shadows on the walls. Morgan sat beside me, close but not quite touching, his body rigid in a way that made me hyper-aware of the space between us. "About the other night," he said suddenly. I turned to him, my pulse spiking. "What about it?" He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It was weird, right? A dozen responses battled in my mind. I could have laughed it off, brushed it away like it was nothing. But I didn't, because it wasn't nothing. "It doesn't have to be," I said carefully, testing his reaction. Morgan's gaze flickered to me, something unreadable behind his eyes. For a moment, the weight of unspoken words filled the space between us. Then, just as quickly, he looked away. "Yeah," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Let's just forget it happened." I nodded, but deep down, I knew forgetting wasn't an option, because something had already changed, and there was no going back. Denial only works for so long. I told myself that Morgan's lingering glances meant nothing, that the hesitation in his voice, the unspoken words between us, were just my own wishful thinking. But the weight of uncertainty became unbearable. I had to know. It was late when I finally confronted him. We had spent the evening as we always did, half watching a movie, half lost in the thick silence that had taken over our friendship. But this time, I wasn't going to let the moment slip away. "Morgan," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Yeah." I hesitated, then forced the words out. "That night, when you walked in on me, something changed, didn't it?" He tensed, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw something. Guilt? Fear? But then he shook his head, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It was just awkward, that's all. We don't have to make it a big deal." But it was a big deal. "Then why have you been acting different?" I pressed. "Why do you keep looking at me like?" "Like what?" His voice was sharp now, defensive. "Like you're trying to figure something out." Silence stretched between us. Then finally he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know, okay? I don't know what you want me to say." I swallowed hard. "The truth." Morgan exhaled sharply, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm straight," he said, and though I had expected those words, they still hit like a punch to the gut. "I know," I said quietly. "But that doesn't mean nothing happened between us." He finally met my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I saw it. The hesitation, the confusion, the undeniable something that had been building between us. But then, just as quickly, he buried it. "It was just a moment," he said. "You're my friend. That's all this has ever been." The finality in his voice was worse than any rejection I had prepared for. I nodded, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "Yeah," I murmured. "Just a moment." I had my answer, and I wished I had never asked. In the days that followed, Morgan and I became strangers. Conversations turned brief, our once effortless connection reduced to awkward pleasantries. It wasn't just the rejection that stung. It was the way he acted like none of it had happened. Like I hadn't sat there, heart in my hands, asking for honesty. Like the silence between us wasn't suffocating. At first, I convinced myself that space would fix things. That given time, we'd find our way back to the friendship we had before. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together. And then, the betrayal came. It happened at a party, surrounded by the hum of careless laughter and the clinking of drinks. Morgan was there, blending seamlessly into the crowd, the weight of our last conversation seemingly forgotten. I had kept my distance, unwilling to force something that was already slipping through my fingers. But as I moved through the room, a hushed conversation stopped me cold. "He totally misread it," someone was saying, their tone laced with amusement. "Wait, seriously?" Another voice chimed in. "That's awkward as hell." Then laughter, sharp, cutting. And then Morgan's voice. "I mean, what was I supposed to do?" "It was just," he hesitated, then chuckled. "Honestly, I don't even know how it got to that point. I didn't need to hear more." Heat surged through my chest, a mix of anger and humiliation burning under my skin. I turned, and for the first time, I really saw him, not as the friend I had trusted, but as someone who had made my vulnerability into a joke. Morgan met my gaze across the room, his smile faltering. Maybe he saw the hurt in my eyes. Maybe for a second he regretted it. But he didn't come after me. He didn't say a word. I walked away that night knowing something had ended. Not just the fragile hope I had held on to, but the foundation of trust one had once believed was unshakable. Morgan and I were done. And this time, I wouldn't be the one trying to fix it.